All right, so we're diving into transurfing today, and from the excerpts you've sent over, it seems to offer a really different way of looking at fate and how much control we actually have over our lives. I'm super curious to hear more.
Yeah, transurfing definitely kind of shakes up the usual ways we think about reality. It suggests that we're not just, passively, just along for the ride with fate, but actively shaping our own experiences.
Yeah, one thing that really jumped out at me in these excerpts was the idea that in transurfing, apples fall to the sky. What in the world does that even mean? It definitely got my attention.
It's a really powerful metaphor, and it really gets at the core of transurfing. It's about breaking free from those limited ideas we have about what's possible and realizing that we have the power to create a reality that goes against everything we currently understand.
Okay, I'm ready to have my mind blown. So let's start with like a conceptual overview. What are the key concepts and definitions we need to understand to really get transurfing?
Sure. Well, one of the most fundamental concepts is this idea of the alternative space. Transurfing basically proposes that there's this vast information field out there that contains all possible scenarios for every single event, kind of like a cosmic library of possibilities.
So instead of there being just one fixed timeline for our lives, there are actually tons of variations all existing at the same time.
Exactly. Imagine a giant cosmic movie reel with every possible version of your life all playing out at the same time. And the key here is that you're not stuck on just one linear track. Transurfing says you have the power to choose which reality you experience.
But if all these possibilities are already out there, how do we actually go about choosing the reality we want? What's the mechanism for that?
That's where the concept of thought energy comes in. Transurfing suggests that our thoughts aren't just, mental events. They actually have a real energetic impact. Our thoughts act like a spotlight. They illuminate and materialize specific sectors within the alternative space.
So if we're always focused on, negativity and problems, we're kind of inadvertently tuning in to those frequencies within the alternative space and making those scenarios more likely to show up in our lives.
Exactly. You're essentially highlighting those particular scenes in your cosmic movie reel. But it's important to note that this doesn't mean we single-handedly create the entire universe. Our thought energy interacts with a massive field that's influenced by countless other beings and forces.
That makes sense. So it's not about trying to control every single detail of our lives, but more about consciously aligning our energy with the reality we want.
Right. And this leads to another really important concept in transurfing, the difference between desire and choice. Simply wishing or dreaming about something isn't enough. Transurfing emphasizes the importance of making a conscious choice, of saying, this is what I choose to experience, and then aligning our thoughts and feelings and actions with that choice.
So it's not about passively hoping for things to change, but actively choosing the change we want to see. That's a really empowering concept.
It is, and it brings us back to that riddle you mentioned earlier about the apples falling to the sky. The riddle goes like this. Everyone can have the freedom to choose whatever they want, but here's a riddle for you. How do you acquire that freedom? When you guess the answer correctly, your apples will fall to the sky.
Okay, so what's the answer to this riddle? How do we get that freedom to choose?
The way I see it, the riddle is pointing to the very heart of transurfing itself. It's about understanding and applying these principles, recognizing that the alternative space exists, harnessing the power of our own thought energy, and making choices that are aligned with our desired reality.
So while we might not literally see apples defying gravity, the idea is that we can break free from our limited ideas of what's possible.
Exactly. It's about expanding our awareness of what we can achieve and experience. When we align ourselves with the principles of transurfing, things that seem impossible, like apples falling to the sky, become possible.
This is already giving me a whole new way of looking at how I approach my life. Instead of feeling like I'm constantly battling against fate, it's more like I'm navigating a vast ocean of possibilities, choosing my course and adjusting my sails along the way.
That's a great analogy. And the beauty of transurfing is that it empowers you to become the captain of your own ship, steering yourself toward the destination you desire.
So let's dig a little deeper into the author's methodology here. How does transurfing suggest that we can actually make these choices and influence our reality in a tangible way? What are the key principles involved?
One of the most important principles is what the author calls sliding, which is the process of consciously shifting our focus and energy toward our desired reality.
So it's not just about visualizing our goals, but about actually feeling and experiencing them as if they're already happening in our lives.
Exactly. It's about embodying that reality in our thoughts, feelings, and actions.
Okay, I can see how that would start to shift our energy and align us with our desired outcomes. But how do we make sure we're sliding toward the right reality? How do we set our intentions in a way that actually brings about the changes we want?
That's where the concept of intention comes in, and it goes hand in hand with sliding. Intention in transurfing is about making a conscious and focused decision. It's not a vague wish or a fleeting desire, but a firm resolve to experience a specific reality.
So it's about moving beyond simply wanting something and making a deliberate choice to have it. But how do we know we're choosing the right things? How do we tell the difference between what we truly desire and what might just be a passing whim or a product of societal conditioning?
That's a great question, and transurfing addresses that through the concept of pendulums. Pendulums in this context represent external forces, societal expectations, limiting beliefs, negative thought patterns that can try to pull us away from our true path.
So they're like energetic hooks that try to latch onto our energy and pull us off course.
Exactly. And the key to overcoming these pendulums is to become aware of them and consciously choose not to engage with their energy. We need to figure out what truly resonates with our authentic selves and what's simply a distraction or a detour from where we're meant to be going.
So it's about recognizing when we're being pulled off course and making a choice to stay aligned with our own intentions. But how do we actually do that in a practical sense? How do we detach from these pendulums and stay focused on what really matters to us?
One of the most effective techniques that transurfing offers is what the author calls reducing importance. It's about recognizing how much significance we give to things and consciously choosing to release the extra importance we often put on external factors.
So if we're constantly worried about what other people think or obsessing over circumstances we can't control, we're giving those things a lot of importance and therefore giving them a lot of power over our reality.
Exactly. We're essentially feeding those pendulums with our energy and letting them dictate our experience. Transurfing suggests that we shift our focus inward to our own inner world to reconnect with our true selves, our values, and our unique path.
Okay, so it's about developing a sense of self-assuredness and inner knowing that lets us move through the world without being swayed by external pressures. But how do we deal with those negative emotions that are just a part of life? Does transurfing offer any guidance on how to handle those?
It does, and it actually has a very different perspective on how to approach negative emotions. Instead of trying to suppress them or force ourselves to be positive all the time, transurfing suggests that we allow ourselves to experience those emotions fully.
Wait, really? Most self-help advice is all about positive thinking and avoiding negativity like the plague.
I know, right? It seems counterintuitive. But transurfing recognizes that when we resist or suppress our emotions, we actually give them more power. It's like trying to hold a beach ball underwater. The more you push it down, the more forcefully it pops back up.
So it's about acknowledging our emotions, letting them move through us, and then releasing them. But wouldn't that just create a roller coaster of emotional ups and downs?
Not necessarily. Transurfing emphasizes that we don't need to get caught up in all the drama of our emotions. We can simply observe them, acknowledge them, and allow them to pass through us without being swept away.
That makes sense. It's like we're creating a channel for our emotions to move through, rather than letting them get stuck and cause blockages.
Exactly. And when we approach our emotions with this kind of acceptance and non-resistance, we create a more harmonious flow of energy within ourselves, and that then shows up in our external reality.
This is all so incredibly empowering. But I'm curious, does transurfing talk about the role of intuition in this process? How do we know we're making choices that are truly in line with our highest good?
That's a great question. And transurfing actually puts a lot of emphasis on intuition. It suggests that our intuition is our most direct link to the alternative space, that it's our inner compass guiding us toward the realities that are most aligned with what our soul truly desires.
So it's about tuning into that inner knowing that often gets drowned out by all the noise of our thoughts and outside pressures. But how do we tell the difference between our true intuition and just wishful thinking?
That's where the practice of quieting the mind and cultivating a deeper connection with ourselves comes in. The more we connect with our inner wisdom, the clearer our intuitive guidance becomes. And transurfing offers several techniques for doing just that.
That's fascinating. I'm eager to learn more about those techniques. But before we get into those, I think it would be helpful to hear some concrete examples of how these principles can be applied in everyday life. Does the source material offer any examples of transurfing in action?
It does. The author uses the example of someone who wants to find a new job. Instead of frantically sending out resumes and stressing over interviews, they choose to slide into their desired reality by imagining themselves already working at their dream job, feeling the satisfaction and fulfillment that comes with it.
So they're essentially immersing themselves in the experience of having their desired job, even before it shows up in their physical reality.
Exactly. And at the same time, they let go of the need to control the how. They trust that the universe will orchestrate the perfect opportunities and connections to make their goal happen.
That makes a lot of sense. It's about shifting our energy from a place of lack and striving to a place of already having and being. But what about those times when we're facing challenges or setbacks? Does transurfing address how to handle those situations?
Absolutely. One of the key principles that transurfing emphasizes is this balance between action and allowing. It's about recognizing that we don't have to force things to happen, but we also can't just sit back and passively wait for our dreams to materialize.
So it's about finding that sweet spot between actively going after our goals and surrendering to the flow of the universe.
Exactly. It's about setting our intentions, taking inspired action, and then trusting that the universe will unfold in a way that supports our highest good.
This all sounds incredibly empowering. But I'm wondering, does the source material offer any advice on how to deal with those moments when we slip back into old patterns of thinking and behaving, when we find ourselves worrying, overthinking, or trying to force outcomes?
It does. And one of the things the author emphasizes is that it's a process, not a destination. We're all constantly evolving and learning. So it's not about being perfect at applying these principles all the time, but about recognizing when we veered off course and gently steering ourselves back towards alignment.
That's reassuring to hear. It takes the pressure off and reminds us that we're all works in progress. But before we dig further into those practical aspects, let's take a step back and recap the key principles of transurfing that we've talked about so far.
Absolutely. We've explored the concept of the alternative space, that huge information field containing all possible realities.
And we've learned that our thoughts act like a spotlight, illuminating and materializing specific sectors within that space.
We've also talked about the importance of conscious choice, of moving beyond just passively wishing and making deliberate decisions about the reality we want to experience.
We've touched on the concepts of sliding, immersing ourselves in our desired reality, and setting clear intentions to guide our journey.
And we've explored how important it is to reduce the importance we give to things outside of ourselves, detaching from those energy-draining pendulums that can try to pull us off course.
We've also discussed the power of allowing our emotions to flow rather than resisting or suppressing them, and the importance of trusting our intuition, that inner compass that leads us towards the realities that are most in tune with what our soul desires. This has been such an insightful exploration of transurfing so far. But before we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I'm wondering if you could share a little bit about the author's background and how they came to develop these fascinating ideas.
Sure, the author's background isn't really rooted in traditional academia. Instead, their understanding of transurfing came from a deep personal journey of exploration and self-discovery. They spent years studying various esoteric traditions and experimenting with different consciousness-expanding practices, which ultimately led to the development of the transurfing model.
That's really interesting. So it's a model that came from personal experience and experimentation rather than just theoretical concepts.
Exactly, and I think that's part of what makes transurfing so compelling. It's not just a bunch of abstract ideas, but a practical framework for understanding and shaping our reality that's been tested and refined through the author's own life experiences.
That definitely adds a layer of authenticity and credibility to the whole approach.
It does. And it also speaks to the transformative power of transurfing. The author's own journey is proof that we can break free from limiting beliefs, overcome challenges, and create a life that aligns with our truest desires.
That's a really inspiring message. And it makes me even more curious to explore the practical applications of transurfing in more detail.
Me too. There's so much more to uncover in terms of the specific techniques and strategies that transurfing offers for shaping our reality. And that's exactly what we'll get into in the next part of our deep dive.
I can't wait.
Welcome back. Before we dive into the specifics of transurfing techniques, I think it's important to understand a key principle that underlies this entire approach to the balance between action and allowing.
Okay. I'm intrigued. What does that actually mean in the context of transurfing?
Well, it means recognizing that we don't have to force things to happen, but we also can't just sit around and wait for our dreams to magically appear.
So it's about finding that middle ground between actively pursuing our goals and surrendering to the natural flow of the universe.
Exactly. It's like this dance between our conscious intentions and how events unfold naturally. We set our goals, take inspired action, and then we have to trust that the universe is going to meet us halfway.
That makes sense. It's
Yeah.
like when you try too hard to force a puzzle piece into place, it just won't fit. But if you just relax and let go, it often just slots in perfectly.
That's a perfect analogy. Transurfing encourages us to approach life with this kind of playful detachment. We set our intentions, we take action when it feels right, and then we trust that the universe will support our goals in ways we might not have even imagined.
That sounds like a much more enjoyable and way less stressful way to live. Speaking of stress, the author mentions this concept of excess potential in the source material. What is that exactly, and how does it relate to this balance of action and allowing?
Excess potential basically refers to all the energy we waste when we overthink, worry, or try to force outcomes. It's like revving your car engine when you're in neutral. You're using energy, but you're not actually moving forward.
So all that mental chatter and anxiety that we so often get caught up in is actually draining us and holding us back from making progress.
Exactly. Transurfing teaches us to quiet the mind, let go of those limiting thoughts, and have faith in how things unfold naturally. It's about understanding that the universe has a much bigger plan than our limited minds can even comprehend, and that when we align ourselves with that plan, things flow so much more smoothly.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. But how do we actually do that? How do we quiet the mind and let go of those thoughts that are holding us back? I'm really interested to hear about the specific techniques that transurfing offers.
Absolutely. Let's start with one of the most basic techniques, sliding.
Sliding. That sounds intriguing. What exactly does that involve?
Imagine you're watching a movie and you get so caught up in the story that you totally forget about your surroundings. You're completely immersed in that fictional world. That's the kind of mental state that transurfing encourages us to cultivate with sliding.
So we're not just visualizing our goals, but we're actually feeling and experiencing them as if they're already part of our lives.
Exactly. We're choosing the reality we want to experience, our desired lifeline, as the author calls it, and then we're fully immersing ourselves in it, both mentally and emotionally. We're sliding into that reality by feeling as if it's already happening.
Okay, I can definitely see how that would start to shift our energy and align us with those outcomes we want. But does this mean we just sit around and daydream all day without taking any concrete action?
Not at all. Remember that principle of balance between action and allowing. Sliding is about creating that energetic alignment and then taking action when it feels inspired. It's about moving through life with ease and flow rather than forcing things to happen.
That makes sense. It's about setting the stage internally for our goals to manifest rather than just trying to power our way through life.
Exactly. And another crucial technique that supports this process is what the author calls intention. And this is where the difference between simply wishing for something and actually choosing it comes in.
Right, because we talked earlier about how transurfing emphasizes the importance of making conscious choices rather than just hoping for things to change passively.
Exactly. Intention in the context of transurfing is about making a clear and deliberate decision. It's not some vague wish or fleeting desire, but a firm commitment to experience a specific reality.
So it's about going beyond wanting something and actively choosing to have it. But how do we make sure that our intentions are aligned with what's truly best for us? How do we know we're not just going after things that we don't really need or that might not ultimately serve us?
That's where self-awareness is so important. Transurfing encourages us to really understand our motivations, to look closely at our desires, and figure out whether they're coming from a place of true alignment with who we are or from a place of fear, lack, or ego-driven pursuits.
So it's about developing a deep understanding of ourselves, our values, and what truly matters to us. But how do we actually do that? That sounds like a pretty big task.
It is, but Transurfing gives us some helpful guidance. One of the key practices the author recommends is journaling. Spend some time each day reflecting on your thoughts, feelings, and desires. Ask yourself questions like, what do I really want out of life? What brings me joy and fulfillment? What am I truly passionate about?
Okay, so it's about taking the time to really connect with what's going on inside of us, to explore our desires and understand what's driving them. But what if we find that some of our desires are actually rooted in fear or insecurity? How do we work with those?
That's where reducing importance comes in again. Remember, the more importance we give to something, the more power we give it over us. So if we're feeling insecure about something, the key is to lessen the importance we're placing on that insecurity.
So instead of trying to fight against those negative feelings, we can acknowledge them and choose to focus on something that empowers us instead.
Exactly. It's not about pretending our feelings aren't there, but about making a conscious choice to not give them too much power. It's about understanding that our thoughts and feelings don't have to define us, and that we have the power to choose which ones we focus on and which ones we let go of.
That's a really helpful way to look at it. It takes the pressure off and reminds us that we don't have to be perfect to make positive changes in our lives.
Exactly. Transurfing isn't about being perfect, but about embracing the process of growth and transformation. It's about recognizing that we're all a work in progress, and that's completely fine.
Okay, so we've covered sliding and intention and touched on the importance of reducing importance. Are there any other key techniques that transurfing offers for creating our reality?
There are. One of the most interesting and admittedly sometimes challenging techniques is what the author calls coordination.
Coordination, what's that all about?
Coordination involves becoming more aware of the subtle signs and messages that the universe is sending our way all the time. It's about understanding that we're not separate from the universe, but a part of it, and that the universe is always communicating with us through a whole range of channels.
It's like learning to speak the language of the universe.
Exactly. And that language often shows up through synchronicities, intuitive nudges, and unexpected opportunities. Transurfing encourages us to pay attention to these little cues and to trust that they're pointing us in the right direction.
That sounds really fascinating, but how do we actually become more aware of those signs and messages? It seems like it would be easy to overlook them if we're not paying close attention.
It definitely takes practice. One of the things the author emphasizes is cultivating a sense of inner silence. When our minds are always busy with thoughts and worries, it's hard to hear those subtle whispers from the universe. So things like meditation, mindfulness, and spending time in nature can be so helpful in quieting the mind and opening ourselves up to those more subtle forms of communication.
Okay, so it's about making space within ourselves to receive those messages from the universe. But what about those times when we feel lost or uncertain about what path to take? Does transurfing offer any guidance for those moments?
It does. One of the most helpful tools that transurfing offers is what the author calls the pendulum technique. It's a way of tapping into our intuition and getting guidance from a higher source.
Okay, I'm definitely curious about this. How does the pendulum technique work?
It involves using a physical pendulum, like a crystal on a chain or even just a string with a weight attached to it. You hold the pendulum and ask a specific question, one that can be answered with a simple yes or no.
So it's like we're using the pendulum as a way to amplify our intuition.
Exactly. The pendulum becomes like an extension of our subconscious mind, giving us access to those deeper levels of knowing that we might not be consciously aware of.
That's fascinating. But what if we're not sure how to interpret what the pendulum is telling us? What if we get a yes when we were really hoping for a no, or the other way around?
It's important to remember that the pendulum technique is just a tool, and like any tool, it can be used effectively or ineffectively. The key is to approach it with an open mind and be willing to trust our intuition. If we're getting an answer that doesn't feel right, it might be a sign that we need to ask the question differently, or that we're holding on to some beliefs that are blocking our intuitive guidance.
That makes sense. So it's about using the pendulum as a way to have a conversation with our intuition rather than just looking for a clear-cut answer.
Exactly. It's a process of exploration and discovery, and the more we practice, the more comfortable we become with interpreting those messages we receive.
This is all so incredibly empowering, but I'm wondering, does transurfing talk about dealing with other people? Because let's be real, even when we're doing everything we can to create positive change, other people can sometimes really throw us off track.
You're absolutely right. And transurfing actually offers some really helpful insights on how to navigate relationships in a way that supports our personal growth and well-being.
Okay, I'm all ears. Tell me more about how transurfing approaches relationships.
One of the key principles is that idea of importance, again. Remember, the more importance we attach to something, the more power it has over us. And this applies to our relationships, too. When we place too much importance on the opinions, judgments, or actions of others, we're basically giving them the power to control how we feel and influence the choices we make.
So if we're always worried about what others think of us, or if we're trying to please everyone all the time, we're basically giving away our power and letting other people dictate our reality.
Exactly. Transurfing encourages us to take back our power by reducing the importance we place on external validation and approval. It's not about becoming indifferent to others, but about understanding that our true worth comes from within, not from what other people think.
That makes a lot of sense. But how do we actually do that? How do we stop caring so much about what other people think?
It starts with being aware of those times when we're giving away our power. Notice when you feel anxious or unsure of yourself because of what someone might think or say. Pay attention to situations where you find yourself trying to make someone else happy, even if it means sacrificing your own needs and desires.
Okay, so awareness is the first step. But what do we do once we've become aware of those patterns?
Transurfing suggests that instead of trying to change other people, we shift our focus to ourselves and our own internal state. It's about recognizing that we can't control how other people think, feel, or act, but we can control our own reactions and responses.
So it's about taking responsibility for our own emotional well-being rather than expecting others to make us happy or unhappy.
Exactly. It's about understanding that our happiness comes from within and that we can choose to experience peace and joy no matter what's happening around us.
This is all so incredibly empowering. But I'm wondering, does transurfing have anything to say about dealing with conflict in relationships? Because even when we're trying to stay grounded and reduce importance, conflicts are bound to happen sometimes.
Absolutely. And transurfing offers a really unique perspective on how to approach conflict. It suggests that conflict happens when two or more people are essentially trying to occupy the same space in the alternative space.
Okay, I'm not sure I follow you there. Can you explain what you mean?
Imagine two people who both want to control the same situation. They each have their own ideas about how things should be, and they're both trying to push their own version of reality onto the other person. This creates this clash of energies, a power struggle that leads to conflict.
So it's like they're both trying to squeeze into the same seat on a bus and there's just not enough room?
That's a great analogy. And transurfing suggests that the way to resolve conflict is to create space for both people's realities to exist at the same time. It's about recognizing that there isn't just one right way to do things and that everyone has their own unique perspective.
So it's about letting go of the need to be right and embracing a more flexible and accepting approach to relationships.
Exactly. It's about understanding that we don't have to agree with someone to respect their point of view. We can acknowledge their reality without feeling like we have to change it or defend our own.
That sounds like a much more peaceful and harmonious way to approach relationships. But how do we actually do that in real life? It seems like it would be hard to let go of our own opinions and beliefs, especially when we feel strongly about something.
It definitely takes practice. One of the most helpful techniques that transurfing offers is what the author calls translating. It involves making a conscious effort to see things from the other person's perspective.
So it's like putting ourselves in their shoes and trying to understand their experience.
Exactly. And when we do that, we often find that their actions start to make a lot more sense. We might not agree with their choices, but we can at least understand where they're coming from.
That makes a lot of sense. It's about cultivating empathy and understanding instead of judgment and criticism. But what if we've tried all of these techniques and we're still having a hard time with a specific relationship? Does transurfing offer any guidance for those situations?
It does. And one of the most radical but potentially freeing ideas that transurfing introduces is the concept of letting go. Sometimes, no matter how hard we try, some relationships just aren't meant to be.
So it's about recognizing when it's time to walk away from a relationship that's no longer serving us.
Exactly. And this can apply to romantic relationships, friendships, family relationships, even work relationships. Sometimes the best thing we can do for ourselves and the other person is to let them go.
That's a powerful message. It reminds us that we have the right to choose who we spend our time with, and that we don't have to put up with relationships that are toxic or draining.
Exactly. And letting go doesn't have to be a big dramatic thing. It can be a gentle and gradual process of creating some distance, setting healthy boundaries, and choosing to invest our energy in those relationships that truly nourish and support us.
This is all so incredibly insightful. But I'm wondering, does transurfing have anything to say about dealing with our own past? Because let's face it, we all have experiences and memories that can come back to haunt us and hold us back.
You're absolutely right. And transurfing has a really interesting take on how to approach the past. It suggests that the past isn't set in stone, but rather a fluid and dynamic part of our reality that we can actually reshape and reinterpret.
So it's not about trying to forget or deny our past, but about looking at it in a way that empowers us.
Exactly. Transurfing suggests that we can use those principles of sliding and intention to create a new story about our past one that supports our well-being in the present and future.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Can you give us an example of how that might work in real life?
Imagine someone who went through something traumatic in their childhood, an experience that they've carried with them for years. This experience might have caused them to develop some negative beliefs about themselves or the world beliefs that are now holding them back.
So they're basically stuck in this negative cycle where their past experiences are shaping their present reality.
Exactly. And transurfing suggests that they can break free from that cycle by making a conscious choice to slide into a new reality, one where that traumatic event no longer defines them.
So they might visualize themselves going back to that time in their childhood, but this time they have the knowledge and resources they need to handle that experience in a more empowered way.
Exactly. They might imagine themselves offering comfort and support to their younger self, or they might picture themselves changing the course of that experience, entirely creating a more positive and empowering outcome.
Okay, so they're essentially using their imagination to create a new and improved version of their past.
Precisely. And by doing that, they're not denying or minimizing the pain they went through, but they're choosing to focus on a different part of that experience, one that gives them strength and helps them to move on.
That's such a powerful concept. It reminds us that we have the power to heal from our past and create a more positive and fulfilling future.
Absolutely. And transurfing also emphasizes that the past isn't just something that happened to us, but something that we're constantly creating in the present moment.
Okay. I'm not sure I get what you mean by that. Can you say more about that?
Our memories aren't fixed or permanent. They're always being shaped and reshaped by our current thoughts, feelings, and beliefs. So if we're constantly dwelling on negative memories, we're actually making them stronger and more real in our present lives.
So if we want to create a more positive and empowering past, we need to consciously choose to focus on the good memories, the lessons we've learned, and the strengths we developed because of those experiences.
Exactly. It's about understanding that even our toughest experiences can teach us valuable lessons and help us grow. And when we choose to focus on those parts of our past, we create a more positive and powerful story that supports our well-being today and in the future.
This is all so incredibly insightful. But I'm wondering, does transurfing say anything about the role of free will in all of this? If we're choosing from these pre-existing possibilities in the alternative space, does that mean our choices are already determined?
That's a great question, and it really gets to the heart of the whole free will debate. Transurfing suggests that while the alternative space contains every possible scenario, our choices are what determine which reality we experience. It's like being handed a menu with tons of different options, but we get to choose what we want to order.
Okay, so we're not just puppets of fate, but active participants in creating our own destinies.
Exactly, and that takes us right back to the riddle about apples falling upward. When we understand and use the principles of transurfing, we break free from those limitations that our current perceptions create and open ourselves up to a world of endless possibilities. We become conscious creators of our own reality, capable of achieving things that we might have thought were impossible before.
This has been such a fascinating exploration of transurfing so far. We've covered a lot of ground, but I'm really excited to hear more about the practical side of things. In the next part of our deep dive, can we get into some specific exercises and techniques that our listener can try out to start using transurfing in their own life?
Absolutely. We'll explore some really practical tips and strategies for using transurfing to make positive changes in all areas of life, from relationships and career to health and well-being.
I'm looking forward to it. Welcome back to our deep dive into transurfing. We've gone over some really fascinating ideas, but I'm really excited to explore the more practical side of things now. What are some specific exercises or techniques that our listeners can use to actually apply these principles in their own lives?
Absolutely. There are so many practical ways to start integrating transurfing into your everyday life. One of the most fundamental is the practice of framing our reality.
Framing, like putting a picture in a frame.
Well, yeah, kind of like that. It's about consciously choosing how we see and interpret the things that happen to us. Instead of just automatically reacting to situations, transurfing encourages us to take a moment and consider how we're framing those events in our minds.
So instead of getting all caught up in the drama or negativity of a situation, we can choose to look at it from a more objective and empowering perspective.
Exactly. Let's say you run into a really frustrating obstacle. You could easily see it as just a setback, something that's holding you back. But transurfing suggests that you could also choose to view it as a challenge, as an opportunity to grow and learn.
That's a great example. It reminds me of the saying, every cloud has a silver lining. It's about choosing to focus on the positive side of any situation instead of dwelling on the negative.
Precisely. And by consciously choosing how we frame things, we're not denying the reality of what's happening, but we're shifting our perspective to one that helps us to move forward in a more effective way.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. But how do we actually go about changing our frame, like in a practical way? It seems like it'd be so easy to fall back into those old habits of negativity.
It definitely takes practice, but there are some specific techniques that can help. One of the easiest and most effective is what the author calls canceling the importance.
We talked about reducing importance earlier. Is this the same idea?
It's related, but canceling the importance takes it a step further. It's about noticing when we're giving way too much importance to a negative thought or emotion, and then making a choice to just let go of that importance.
So instead of letting something that's bothering us get to us, we can just acknowledge it and decide to move on.
Exactly. It's like saying, this thought or feeling doesn't have any power over me. I'm letting it go and choosing to focus my energy on something better.
That sounds really powerful. But what if we're dealing with something that's genuinely difficult or painful? How do we cancel the importance when it feels like everything is falling apart?
It's definitely harder in those situations, but the principle still applies. Transurfing says that even when things are really tough, we still have the power to choose how we respond. We can either get lost in the drama and negativity, or we can choose to stay centered and focused on finding solutions.
So it's not about pretending that everything is fine, but about choosing to approach challenges with inner strength and resilience.
Exactly. And even when we're feeling overwhelmed or discouraged, there's always something to be grateful for. Gratitude is such a powerful antidote to negativity, and it can really help us to shift our attention from what's wrong to what's going right.
That's a really good point. Gratitude can completely change how we see things. Are there any other techniques that can help us to stay on track with our desired reality, especially when things get tough?
Absolutely. One technique that the author really emphasizes is the importance of finding inner peace and balance. When we're stressed, anxious, or feeling overwhelmed, it's so much harder to stay aligned with our intentions.
So basically, taking care of our mental and emotional well-being is crucial if we want to be successful with transurfing.
Exactly. Things like meditation, mindfulness, spending time in nature, or doing activities that bring us joy can all be super helpful for finding that inner peace and balance.
That makes a lot of sense. It's like we need to build a strong foundation within ourselves before we can start creating the reality we want out there. But what about those times when we feel stuck or unsure of where to go next? Does transurfing offer any guidance for figuring that out?
It does. One of the most useful tools that transurfing offers is what the author calls intention setting. It's about making a deliberate choice about the reality we want to experience and then taking steps that are in alignment with that choice to bring it to life.
So it's not just about daydreaming or wishing, but about actually doing things to make our dreams a reality.
Exactly. Intention setting is all about getting clear on what we want, making sure our thoughts, feelings, and actions are all moving in the same direction, and then taking inspired action to make it happen.
Okay, but how do we know what actions to take? What if we're just not sure about the steps to reach our goals?
Transurfing reminds us that we don't need to have all the answers right away. It's about trusting that the universe will guide us and give us the opportunities and resources we need at the right time.
So it's about taking that first step, even if we're not exactly sure where it's going to lead, and believing that the path will unfold as we go.
Exactly. It's about having faith in ourselves and in the universe, and being open to stepping outside of our comfort zones and embracing the unknown.
That sounds a little scary, but also really exciting. But what if we hit roadblocks or setbacks along the way? Does transurfing talk about how to handle those?
Absolutely. Transurfing says that obstacles are just a natural part of the journey and that they can actually be really valuable opportunities for growth and learning. Instead of seeing them as these huge roadblocks, we can choose to see them as detours that are ultimately leading us to where we want to go.
So it's about reframing those challenges as chances to grow and learn instead of as setbacks or failures.
Exactly. And transurfing offers a bunch of different techniques for dealing with obstacles in a way that feels empowering. One of the most effective is what the author calls freelancing.
Freelancing, like working for yourself.
The concept is similar. Freelancing in the context of transurfing is about letting go of the need to control the outcome of a situation and allowing things to happen naturally. It's about releasing that need to micromanage every little detail and trusting that the universe has a plan.
So it's about surrendering to the flow of life rather than trying to force things to happen our way.
Exactly. And it's not about giving up or being passive, but about recognizing that sometimes the best thing to do is to just let go and let things work themselves out.
That makes sense. It's about having faith in a higher power or the intelligence of the universe to guide us toward what's best for us. But what about those times when it feels like we're not moving forward at all? What if we're doing everything right, but we're still not seeing the results we want?
Transurfing reminds us that patience is so important. It tells us that the universe has its own timing, and that our job is to stay aligned with our intentions, take inspired action, and then trust that those results will come when they're meant to.
So it's about surrendering to the process and trusting that everything is unfolding as it should.
Exactly. And even when we don't see those results right away, it's important to remember that every step we take, every action that aligns with our intentions, is moving us closer to where we want to be.
This has been such an incredible exploration of transurfing. I feel like I've learned so much about how to actually put these principles into practice.
Me too. And I think one of the most important things to take away is that transurfing isn't just a set of techniques, but a way of living. It's about cultivating a mindset of empowerment, gratitude, and trust, and then using those things to create a reality that truly reflects our deepest desires.
That's such a beautiful way to put it. And to all our listeners, we hope this deep dive into transurfing has inspired you to explore these principles for yourselves and discover the power you have to create your own reality. Remember, you're the captain of your own ship, and the universe is working with you to support your journey. So set those intentions, take inspired action, and believe in the power of your dreams. Until next time, keep diving deep and keep expanding your awareness of what's truly possible.